My number 3 book is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This was a very intense read from the beginning of the book all the way to the end. Trigger warning for those of you who may not be aware of who Chanel Miller is and the incident that sort of changed her life and the life of her family and friends. She was the victim of an assault, and if you feel that it's best for you to skip this part of the video, feel free to. I'm hoping that this will take me about a minute before I move on to the next book, so skip ahead a minute and sort of save yourself. So Chanel Miller was the victim of a sexual assault on campus at Stanford, and this is the case where the young man was identified from the beginning as perpetrator of the crime, and the judge in the case decided that the young man had such a promising future that he shouldn't let this little assault, stop him from moving on with his life. Who cares about whatever, she's going through in her life? But that's just it. This book is about what she went through in her life subsequent to this assault. Miss Miller tells a very gripping and intense story, and that may be partly because of the subject matter, but she really delves into the cost of denial, the cost of depression, all of it sort of unrecognized. She tries to tell herself, well, it could have been worse. It's not that bad, but she's going through the stages that one goes through when they are the victim of sexual assault. And then she has to fight a system that would prefer that she just go away. And as you know, in the social media age, how the story of this assault and the story of the behavior of the judge hit social media and just blew up and became this national phenomenon at a time when the United States, the larger society of the United States, is being pulled kicking and screaming to look at some of the ways that women are treated in the workplace and in their personal lives. Chanel Miller really does personalize, naturally, I guess, the process of the shock, the trauma, the grief, the depression. She goes through it. She really does go through a lot, and she documents her process to healing in this book. And I think the book is an indication of the journey she goes through in Know My Name, because she is initially broken, but she gathers her pieces together and she heals. And so I think it's in Japan, maybe in China as well. There is this method of repairing broken china, and it's called, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, it's called kintsugi. And this is the process that is used to mend or repair broken china. You get the pieces that you have remaining, and you use gold and other tools to heal the cracks and to repair. And so that is what the little gold lines are on the cover of the book. And I just thought that was appropriate. If this is something that you think you might like to know about, or like to know at least a little more about, then my number 3 book is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and it was a good read. My number 2 book is Labyrinth of Ice by Buddy Levy. And this tells the story of this ill-fated polar expedition in and around Greenland in the late 1800s. This book was not only well written, the pacing was great. This, for me, Labyrinth of Ice was just a page turner. This book was fabulous. One, it's not that long, but two, it was just it was a well-written book about a very interesting expedition to the Arctic Circle, or as far north as people could get reasonably in the late 1800s. It was just real. It just tells you of the hardships that they encounter when things take a turn on the expedition. Everything, the beginning of the expedition, they're hitting all their points, they're doing everything that they should. And then when fateful decisions are made and events transpire, but what Mr. Levy does really well, I think, is tell us or describe, and his descriptions are taken from the copious notes that the Greely expedition took and saved. The originals, and then there were copies made so that their observations and scientific findings, if one packet of papers was lost, there'd be another packet of papers detailing the exact same thing that the original papers had. So they made sure that even if they didn't make it out of the expedition alive, that the scientific work that transpired, that documentation survived them, and that someone would find their paperwork, and that their expedition, their experiments, their discoveries would be known at some point to the wider world. So Levy's description of the icebergs and the different types of icebergs and the ice, the sheer amount of ice. Again, he wrote well enough for me to visualize these huge many-storied icebergs, and this is just what's appearing above the water. Who knows what's beneath the water for these icebergs? Just he describes this collision of icebergs, the grinding, popping, exploding sounds of ice, grinding against ice, moving against ice, running into ice. It was very descriptive, and the characterization of the men on the expedition, they were sort of clearly drawn. Some may have been maybe more stereotypical than the other, and certainly his description of the treatment of the indigenous Greenlanders who accompanied the party, there were two of them, was not always positive. The way that the Americans treated them, it was the late 1800s, and that's all I'm going to say about that. But the overall expedition, their journey across the ice, the mounting of the rescue expedition when it's understood that the initial boat that was supposed to bring the Greely party home sunk, the work of Greely's wife to lobby the president to send out this expedition to rescue her husband, because prior to her husband's expedition, the Greely expedition, another expedition to the North Pole had already resulted in a loss of an expedition, and so she wanted to make sure that her husband didn't become, another explorer who didn't come home, after trying to explore and go the farthest north for America. She didn't want her husband to become another one of those expeditions that didn't come back home. So Labyrinth of Ice, certainly well-written, well-paced. Subject matter just hit on all cylinders for me. I truly, truly enjoyed this book. It was my number 2. And if you don't think that you'd be interested in sort of science, environmental, nonfiction, try this book, and I think you'll change your mind. My last book, as my lighting fades, is A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell. This was, of course, my number 1 book. This was a really fascinating read. So Woman of No Importance reads a great deal like a spy novel because it's about spies during World War II. And you have probably never heard of Virginia Hall, but Virginia Hall was one of the top spies during World War II. This was a woman who tried to work for, I think it was the State Department or the U.S. Foreign Service. They didn't want her certainly didn't want her as a spy or as an intelligence officer. I think she got in as like a secretary, overseas, I think in Turkey or somewhere. And when she tries to advance, they're not interested in her advancing at all, even though just by having been a bit of a socialite and sort of independent, headstrong woman, in her college days, she went to study in France. She had all these connections already established in France, right? She has an unfortunate sort of accident while she's in Turkey, almost loses her life. She manages to go from Turkey. I think she convalesces back home in the United States around that time, World War II starting up. And I'm not going to tell the whole story of how she gets back to France and how she sort of, but she does get back. She does set up this wonderful network of spies who are able to get all this kind of information, in addition to being this top spy that the Gestapo and the German intelligence, they're after her and they know she's a woman, and so they're trying to figure out who she is and they're trying to get to her. And she's working with these various and sundry members of not only her own spy network, but the French resistance. And it's just so, the backdrop, World War II, that especially in this country, has been plumbed and plumbed and plumbed. And just when you think there can't be more to this onion, there's another layer that you encounter and another just amazing story. And that's what A Woman of No Importance is. It's an amazing story of a woman who is really good at what she does, is not recognized for it, of course, by either her home country, the United States, or even as she's working for England as a spy. They continually sort of try to shove these men, as her supervisors, as her managers, when she's really the one who should be in charge of the operation. She's really the one getting things done. But they keep sending these sort of, Oxford-educated men over to run things, these rich Oxford-educated men to come over and sort of run the spy network when they literally have no capacity or interest to do either. And she's the one actually on the ground doing all of the things. I really enjoyed this book. So this is another book that I can't wait to see the movie for. Not that the writing was as visual for me as Labyrinth of Ice was, but just the subject matter. And Virginia Hall herself, she was clearly something else. She was clearly a woman who knew her own mind, made her own way, and I admire that. I admire that in her. I think she is an interesting woman. I think she is a very interesting woman, a woman before her time, and I think a woman who deserves to be better known in the history of World War II, not just for the United States, but for France and for Great Britain. She did so many amazing, amazing things, just herself personally, and then on behalf of the war efforts. And she deserves a lot more recognition than she gets. Some of that is by her design, because she is not someone who wanted to be feted. She didn't want to be, she wanted to do the work and be recognized because she did the work, but she didn't want to be famous. Right? How weird is that? If you have to pick a book for Women's History Month to read for next year or before Women's History Month, then pick up Woman of No Importance. I think you will be very happy that you did. And this was my number one pick for the OctaFinals from Group A. The three books that went on to the quarterfinals from Group A are A Woman of No Importance by Sonia Purnell, Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and Underland by Robert MacFarlane. I'm a little sad that Labyrinth of Ice didn't make it to the quarterfinal rounds because I just thought it was such a great book. I absolutely stand by my top three, which were Woman of No Importance, Labyrinth of Ice, and Know My Name. Two of them made it in. Labyrinth of Ice should have made it, but it didn't. But if you want, again, to read really good nonfiction, science, environment, nature book, then pick that one up. You will not regret it. So 2 out of 3 isn't bad. I'm on to the quarterfinals, and I think I'm in Group B, and I'm going to follow this video with my hands-on copies of the 6 books that I'm reading for the quarterfinals and Group B. I'm not going to say what I thought about them or what I'm ranking them. I'm just going to show you what the books are in real time, but on video. Well, it's real time for me anyway. Remember to stay safe, be kind, be patient, and be compassionate. And I just heard a YouTuber that I watch say something that's also important, and that is stay sane. Take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. It is important in this new normal. Bye-bye.